Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This moment is not casual, and you are not here by accident. Something precise is happening right now, and it found you exactly where you are. Not when you were strongest, not when everything was clear, but right here, in the middle of your normal life, carrying a quiet weight you haven't fully named. You have been tired in a way rest does not fully fix. Pressured in a way no single problem explains. Isolated without being alone. Functioning yet sensing that something underneath has shifted. You did not imagine that. This message is not meant to alarm you, it is meant to orient you. There is urgency here, but not fear. There is movement, but not chaos. What you felt recently was not a breakdown, not confusion, and not weakness. It was a moment of contact. Brief, subtle, easy to dismiss if you were less attentive than you are. You may have noticed it as a pause in your thoughts, or a sudden clarity followed by silence, or a strange calm in a situation that should have overwhelmed you. Nothing dramatic on the outside, everything precise on the inside. You did not go looking for this. You did not force anything open. You were simply being yourself, responding honestly, staying upright under pressure, making small decisions that aligned with your core instead of your fear. And in doing that, something shifted. Not because you tried, because you did not. There are reasons this felt personal. There are reasons it happened quietly. There are reasons you are still standing without fully understanding why. You are not being told everything yet. You do not need the full picture to benefit from what has already occurred. But you do need clarity about one thing this moment involved you directly. Not your potential. Not a future version of you. You as you are now. This is not a warning. It is an explanation that begins to form. What you experienced was not random stress or coincidence. It was a response to your stability. A response to how you hold yourself under pressure. A response to something consistent in you that did not need to announce itself to be recognized. Stay with this message. Do not rush it. Nothing here requires action yet, only understanding. And understanding is already starting to settle. This message is for you, and it is not difficult to tell. Not because you believe in special labels, and not because you have been searching for confirmation. It is for you because something in you stayed steady when it would have been easier to react, collapse, or disengage. You did not dramatize what you felt. You did not assign meaning too quickly. You kept living thinking, deciding even while something subtle pressed against you from the inside. That is the identifier. Many people experience pressure and immediately externalize it. They panic, seek validation, or lose coherence. Others numb themselves, distract themselves, or disconnect from their inner signals entirely. You did neither. You noticed something was off, but you did not let it run you. You stayed functional. You stayed oriented. You stayed yourself. That is not accidental. This message is not for someone who wants to be chosen. It is for someone who already operates from an internal alignment that does not require reinforcement. You may not use the word chosen in your daily life. You may even resist it. But the identity is not about status. It is about structure. You have a way of absorbing pressure without broadcasting it. You regulate before you react. You stabilize before you speak. That is not learned behavior from motivation or theory. That is baseline wiring strengthened by experience. What happened involved you directly because you were present for it without trying to control it. You did not summon strength consciously. You did not prepare defenses. You did not go into fight mode. And yet something held. Something in you resisted without effort. That distinction matters. There is a difference between struggling to stay upright and simply remaining upright. You were not fighting to maintain yourself. You were maintaining yourself automatically. Even when your mind questioned what was happening, your core did not destabilize. This is why this message narrows quickly. It is not for people who need reassurance. It is for someone who needs context. Someone who already knows something occurred but wants to understand why it did not disrupt them the way it should have. You are not being elevated here. You are being identified. The term chosen one applies not because you were selected at random, but because your system responds differently under load. You remain coherent when conditions would normally fracture attention, emotion, or decision-making. That is not superiority, it is specificity, and it explains why what happened did not escalate, why it did not overwhelm you, why it resolved quietly instead of loudly. This message exists to remove doubt, not create identity theater. You are not being asked to adopt anything new. You are being shown what has already been operating in you without announcement. And that clarity will make the next part easier to recognize. There is one symptom you recognized immediately, even if you did not label it out loud. It was not panic. It was not fear. It was not confusion. It was a quiet pressure paired with an unusual calm. You felt something moving internally without emotional noise attached to it. Your body may have felt heavier or lighter than usual. Your breathing may have slowed without intention. Your thoughts may have spaced out, not in a scattered way, but in a suspended one. You were alert yet slightly removed, present yet not reactive. At first, it would have been easy to judge this as fatigue or stress or mental overload, something to push through or ignore. But it did not behave like exhaustion. Rest did not immediately reset it. Distraction did not dissolve it, and yet it was not debilitating. That is the key detail. What you experienced was not a malfunction. It was a signal. And signals are often misread when you expect problems to announce themselves loudly. This kind of sensation appears when a system is transitioning between states. Not breaking down, not ramping up, but recalibrating. The mind tends to look for errors when something feels unfamiliar. But unfamiliar does not mean wrong, especially when functionality remains intact. You were still able to think clearly, still able to make decisions, still able to regulate your emotions. That tells you this was not instability, it was compression. Pressure applied evenly does not cause collapse. It causes focus. You may have noticed a narrowing of attention, less tolerance for noise, less interest in superficial engagement, a preference for stillness or minimal input. That is not withdrawal. That is your internal system prioritizing coherence while something adjusts. Self-judgment often enters at this stage. Thoughts like, "Why do I feel off?" or "Something must be wrong with me." But those interpretations assume the body and mind only change in response to damage. In reality, they also change in response to alignment. Transitions feel strange because they interrupt autopilot. Your emotional neutrality during this time is especially important. You did not spiral. You did not catastrophize. You observed. That alone reframes the entire experience. A destabilizing event does not allow for calm observation. A recalibration does. Even the physical sensations align with this. Subtle tension without anxiety. Fatigue without depletion. Stillness without emptiness. These combinations do not appear during breakdowns. They appear during threshold moments. Nothing needed fixing. Nothing needed suppressing. Nothing needed dramatizing. Your system was responding to pressure by consolidating, not fragmenting. Once you see this clearly, the confusion dissolves. You stop asking what went wrong and begin recognizing what shifted. And that recognition prepares you to understand why this pressure appeared now, why it was contained, and why it did not overwhelm you. Because what comes next depends on understanding that this symptom was not a warning sign. It was an indicator that something held steady when it mattered. What you encountered was not internal imagination, and it was not ordinary stress layering itself onto your day. There was an external pressure applied subtle enough to pass unnoticed by most people, yet structured enough to test stability rather than provoke reaction. This pressure did not arrive chaotically. It arrived with timing. You may trace it back to a recent window, not far in the past, a period where demands clustered, expectations increased, or emotional weight accumulated without a single obvious trigger. Nothing dramatic announced itself, no crisis, no collapse, just a quiet convergence that asked more of you without asking permission. That is how this kind of confrontation operates. It does not shout, it compresses. The defining factor is not that pressure existed, but that you remained operational while it was present. You did not lose your sense of sequence. You did not abandon routine. You did not become erratic, reactive, or impulsive. You noticed the pressure, but you did not reorganize your life around it. That tells you something important. When pressure overwhelms a system, functionality degrades. Attention scatters, emotional regulation weakens, decisions become reactive. You saw none of that in yourself. Even if you felt heavier, slower, or quieter, your internal structure remained intact. This was not accidental resilience. It was tested resilience. The pressure was coordinated in the sense that it touched multiple points at once. Energy focus, emotional bandwidth, and timing were all slightly affected. Not enough to incapacitate you, enough to observe whether your stability depended on ideal conditions. It did not. You continued to show up. You continued to respond proportionally. You continued to choose clarity over urgency. That is the confrontation. Not a dramatic clash, but a measured application of load. And the outcome was already clear before you consciously realized it. You adapted without recalculating your identity. You adjusted without questioning your worth. You stayed present without forcing positivity or retreating into detachment. That combination is rare under pressure. Most people either brace too hard or dissolve too quickly. You did neither. You absorbed what was applied and redistributed it internally without visible fracture. That is why the experience felt contained rather than explosive. This pressure did not escalate because it did not need to. The information it was designed to reveal was already evident. Your internal regulation held. Your coherence remained intact. And because of that, the moment passed without demanding more. Understanding this reframes everything. You were not under attack in the way people imagine. You were under observation through circumstance. And the result was not disruption, but confirmation. That is why you are still standing, still oriented, and still moving forward without urgency. The pressure did its work quietly, and now that work can be examined clearly. Now it becomes possible to look at what had happened in detail without distortion, without drama, and without minimizing it. The pressure you experienced did not arrive as one overwhelming force. It distributed itself across several familiar areas of your life, testing different points of stability at the same time. You will recognize these patterns because you lived through them while remaining functional. First, there was doubt. Not loud doubt, not spiraling self-questioning, but a low-grade uncertainty that hovered near your decisions. You may have noticed thoughts asking whether your timing was right, whether your direction still made sense, whether the effort you were putting in was proportionate to the results you were seeing. The key detail is that this doubt did not hijack you. You acknowledged it without obeying it. You did not rush to change course, and you did not freeze. You continued making reasonable decisions while allowing the doubt to exist without authority. Second, there was fear. Again, not panic, not dread. More like a subtle awareness of risk. A sense that something could go wrong if you misstepped, spoke too quickly, or pushed too hard. For many people, this kind of fear causes either over-control or avoidance. In you, it resulted in restraint. You became more deliberate. You paused before reacting. You did not shrink, but you also did not overextend. That balance tells you fear was present, but it did not dominate your nervous system. Third, there was an energy drain, not exhaustion that forces collapse, but a noticeable reduction in excess energy. You may have felt less interested in unnecessary conversations, less tolerant of noise, less motivated to perform for others. This is often misinterpreted as burnout, but burnout strips capacity. What you experienced conserved it. You still did what mattered. You simply stopped spending energy where it did not belong. That is not depletion. That is regulation. Fourth, there was isolation. Not abandonment, not loneliness in the emotional sense, but a sense of being internally alone with your experience. You may have noticed that explaining what you felt seemed unnecessary or even impossible. Not because others would not listen, but because you did not need external processing to stabilize. You did not reach outward for grounding. You grounded yourself internally. That is a sign of structural independence, not emotional withdrawal. Fifth, there was delay. Things did not move as quickly as you expected or hoped. Responses took longer. Outcomes remained unresolved. Momentum slowed. This is often the breaking point for many people. Delay creates agitation, rumination, and impulsive action. In you, it created patience. Not passive waiting, but a willingness to let timing reveal itself. You stayed engaged without forcing acceleration. You remained present without demanding resolution. What matters most is not that these pressure points existed, but how you moved through them. You did not become rigid under doubt. You did not become reckless under fear. You did not collapse under reduced energy. You did not chase validation under isolation. You did not self-sabotage under delay. Each category applied pressure in a way that mirrors real psychological strain. Nothing abstract, nothing symbolic. These were everyday stressors layered carefully enough to test whether your internal regulation depended on comfort. It did not. You adapted in real time. You made small adjustments rather than dramatic shifts. You listened without overinterpreting. You conserved energy instead of forcing output. You trusted your pacing instead of comparing yourself to external timelines. That is not accidental behavior. It is the result of an internal system that prioritizes coherence over urgency. This section is longer because it matters for retention, but also because it matters for clarity. When you break the experience down, honestly, you see that nothing about it required heroics. You were not fighting anything. You were managing load. And you managed it quietly without needing recognition, without needing reinforcement. That is the point. Pressure reveals structure. And what was revealed here was not fragility, but an ability to stay integrated while multiple points were engaged at once. Once you see that clearly, you stop wondering why this happened. You begin understanding what it confirmed. Now there is enough distance from the moment to review it without distortion. Not to relive it, not to dramatize it, but to evaluate it with clarity. When you look back at what occurred, the most important realization is not about the pressure itself. It is about how consistently you remained coherent while it was present. Nothing about this can be explained by luck. Nothing about it can be reduced to coincidence. Patterns, this precise, do not emerge randomly, and responses this stable do not appear without structure underneath them. You can see it now. Even while things felt compressed, your thinking stayed organized. You did not jump to conclusions. You did not rewrite your identity to make sense of discomfort. You did not assign blame outward or inward. You allowed time to pass without forcing meaning too quickly. That is a sign of internal alignment. If this had been chance, your reactions would have been inconsistent. Some days you would have felt calm, other days reactive. Some decisions would have been clear, others impulsive. Instead, there was continuity, a steady way of meeting each moment that did not depend on mood reassurance or external validation. This is where many people misinterpret resilience. They imagine it as endurance through pain. What you demonstrated was not endurance, but coherence. You did not grit your teeth and push through. You stayed regulated. You stayed proportionate. You stayed aware without becoming hyper-alert. That distinction matters. When something truly overwhelms a person, their inner narrative becomes fragmented. They replay events, anticipate outcomes, or ruminate on alternatives. You did not spiral into analysis loops. You thought when thinking was useful, and you rested when it was not. Your mind did not hijack your body, and your body did not hijack your decisions. That is not a coincidence of temperament. It is the result of an internal system that has learned over time how to stay integrated under load. You may also notice that you did not seek dramatic resolution afterward. You did not need to process endlessly or talk it out until it made sense. Understanding came quietly, gradually, almost automatically. That tells you the experience did not injure anything inside you. It clarified something that was already stable. This is why explanations that rely on chance fall apart. Random stress does not produce insight. Random difficulty does not leave coherence intact. What you experienced had structure, and your response matched it with equal structure. The confirmation here is simple but precise. You are not held together by circumstances. Your stability is not conditional. It does not require ideal timing, perfect information, or constant reinforcement. It is internal, consistent, and already operating. Once you recognize that the need to question yourself fades, you stop asking whether you handled it correctly because the evidence is already there. You handled it naturally. You did not become someone else to survive it. You remained yourself. And that realization settles something quietly, but permanently. When you place your experience alongside common human reactions, the difference becomes clear without needing exaggeration. Most people do not fall apart because they are weak. They fall apart because their stability depends on conditions staying favorable. When pressure enters from multiple angles, their internal balance has nowhere to redistribute the load. You saw this contrast indirectly. Under far less strain, many people become reactive. Their tone changes. Their patience shortens. They rush decisions, seek reassurance, or disengage entirely. Some grow restless and impulsive. Others freeze and postpone everything. Even mild uncertainty can fracture focus when internal regulation is fragile. That is not what happened with you. You stayed present. You stayed functional. You stayed proportionate. Even when energy dipped, you did not disappear. Even when clarity paused, you did not panic. Even when outcomes slowed, you did not force movement just to escape discomfort. You allowed each moment to be what it was, without amplifying it or shrinking from it. This is uncommon, but it is not a badge. It is an observation. Many people mistake intensity for strength. They equate emotional reaction with depth. In reality, stability under quiet pressure requires far more internal organization than dramatic endurance under obvious stress. Loud challenges activate adrenaline. Subtle pressure exposes structure. Most systems destabilize when no clear enemy is visible. You did not. You did not need to label yourself resilient to behave that way. You did not remind yourself to stay calm. You did not perform strength. You simply remained coherent. That is what sets this apart. It was not effortful. It was consistent. This does not make you superior. It makes you specific. Your nervous system did not escalate unnecessarily. Your thinking did not race ahead of reality. Your emotions did not demand immediate resolution. You trusted your pacing without comparing it to others. You allowed silence without filling it. You tolerated not knowing without collapsing into speculation. That level of tolerance is rare, not because it is mystical, but because most people are never required to develop it. Life usually cushions reactions or explains pressure quickly. When it does not, instability shows. In you, it did not. This comparison is not meant to elevate you. It is meant to normalize what you experienced without minimizing it.